When I learned that the Epstein files revealed names of individuals who had endured sexual harm, my head went fuzzy, my stomach dropped, my body contracted, and everything just tightened. That was my body doing what I suppose bodies do when something familiar and or painful is encountered. Even though I've done the work, even though I'm further along than I was, even though I can look back and see how far I've come, my body still keeps its own record of the things that have made me uncomfortable, even give me anxiety, and everything else in between. And if you're like me or one of those people observing or even watching the coverage right now and feeling something you can't quite explain, maybe this episode, 5 minutes, will help you unpack certain things. This episode, 5 minutes, is for you as much as anyone else. Greetings, you're listening to Like Me Officially podcast. I'm JK, and this is where raw truths meet reflection, where I challenge social narratives, explore self-efficacy, and move beyond surviving life-changing experiences into courage, self-assurance, and thriving. Because if you're anything like me, you'll recognize that life is for living and living freely. Hashtag our time to thrive. This episode touches on sexual violence, childhood sexual abuse, high profile abuse cases, and some of my own personal experience. If you need to step away, please do. Come back when you're ready. You matter more than this episode. And this episode will land differently depending on where you are right now. Some of you might be thinking about someone in your life who may be struggling. Some of you are that person. Some of you may be sitting with something you've never quite named. All of that is okay. I've been paying attention to the commentary since the Epstein files dropped. And what I keep coming back to isn't what's been said, it's the proportion of the commentary. So for example, 20 minutes or more on the list, the networks, the files, who was on the plane, who was at the island, who sent the emails, what the emails said, who knew, and then 5 seconds on the victims and survivors, the most important actors of this story. And with that comes the statements, my heart goes out to the victims and survivors, and then straight back to the files. I've watched that same thing happen with Diddy, R. Kelly, Prince Andrew, to name but a few. The perpetrator gets the story. The survivor, the victims, get the sentence every single time. And that pattern, it needs to be called out because it isn't accidental. Power controls the narrative. People like Epstein, Diddy, R. Kelly, Prince Andrew, they have money, lawyers, PR, and access. Not only that, the access, even in their passing, to individuals who know the truth, but whose own reputations could be in jeopardy if the secrets are all truly revealed. Survivors have trauma and a voice, and those are not treated as equal. We mourn power more than harm. The focus becomes the fall of the famous person, not the lifelong impact on the people they have harmed. Sympathy shifts upward and not outward. Survivors are judged, not heard. They're expected to be perfect, consistent, calm, silent, yet loud enough to prove it happened. And then their trauma is used against them. Institutions protect themselves. Full truth exposes systems, not individuals. So accountability gets limited, delayed, or buried. And child abusers, paedophiles, sex offenders, criminals, whatever you want to call them, don't look like their crime. They look successful, respected, celebrated, It's easier to doubt the survivor than to question the culture that rewards power. And nobody likes ugly. We're drawn to power, to the fall from grace, to the scandal. That's a story we know how to follow. But the survivor's story asks something different of us. It asks us to sit with something that doesn't have a clean ending, something that can't be scrolled past, something that asks, how did this happen? Who allowed it? And what are we going to do right now for the people still living with it? That's hard to look at. So we give it 5 seconds and keep moving. I want to say this clearly. The survivors aren't ugly. The experience, what they endured is, what was done to them is, the systems that failed them are, and that's what people don't want to look at. Brené Brown talks about the difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy says, my heart goes out to you, and moves on. Empathy is different. It asks you to go to where someone is, to feel with them, to stay rather than step back. My heart goes out to the victims is sympathy. What survivors need right now is empathy, presence, someone willing to stay with it. 5 minutes, actually, more than 5 minutes. That's what I'm asking. 5 minutes of your attention, not on the files, not on the names or the networks, but on the people the headlines are forgetting. 5 minutes, that could mean everything to someone in your life right now. I've been overwhelmed by the level of coverage, which made me wonder, why did the US justice system decide to drop a case with millions of files? What this coverage volume is doing to those consuming it, because that matters. There's a concept I've recently come across, originally a military strategy used by the US Armed Forces called shock and awe. The idea is to overwhelm the enemy so much, so fast, that they lose the ability to respond. Not just physically, psychologically, paralysis through overload. Naomi Klein, in her book The Shock Doctrine, took that same principle and applied it to politics and media. Her argument was that when people are overwhelmed with too much information, too much chaos, too much noise, they don't get activated. They disconnect, they disengage. And when people disconnect and disengage, those in power can do what they like with very little resistance. So I think about the Epstein coverage, millions of documents, thousands of hours of reading, weeks of wall-to-wall commentary, redactions, re-releases, more files, more speculation, more headlines. And at a certain point, the volume stops feeling like transparency. It starts feeling like noise. And noise has the same effect as silence. It buries the thing that actually matters. So people disconnect, they disengage, not because they don't care, but because they've been overwhelmed into passivity. And while that's happening, survivors are being re-triggered, re-exposed, and reduced to a footnote again. That's the cost of the imbalance, and it's deliberate as the contents of the files redacted or made available. We're naturally curious, and I get that. But I want to ask, in situations like this, is that curiosity being directed at the right things? Because I don't think it is. And that imbalance has a cost. The world is consumed with who was on the flight logs, whose name is in the files, which celebrity, which politician, which institution. And yes, I get it. I'm curious too. And yes, there is accountability to be found in those answers. I'm not dismissing that because I want to know which brands I should stop using immediately if there is an association that challenges my values. But that curiosity, the one fixated on the traffickers, the paedophiles, the power, the spectacle, that's the easy kind, I feel. It keeps us at a comfortable distance from a harder question. Over 1,000 children and teenagers, minors, were harmed by Epstein. And the commentary is still spending far more time on the list and 5 seconds on those that really matter. Curiosity is natural, but in situations like this, I want to ask what we're actually being curious about. Because these were children, minors, teenagers, in environments with powerful, celebrated, supposedly responsible adults. Didn't anyone think that was strange? Did no one question it? Who was looking after these young people? Who was responsible for their care, their safety, their well-being? Who noticed something and said nothing? Who tended to their wounds physically, emotionally? And what did they do with what they saw? That's the curiosity I'm asking for. I say all that because what's happened doesn't happen in a vacuum. Grooming is not a spontaneous act. It's deliberate and calculated. And it doesn't just target the child, it targets everyone around them, the caregivers, the community, the people who are supposed to be paying attention. Perpetrators work to appear trustworthy. They seek roles and positions that give them authority and a good reputation around children. That's how they sustain access. That's how they avoid questions. And the science behind this matters here, particularly when people ask why young people don't say no or why don't they walk away. The adolescent brain is still forming. The part responsible for reasoning, weighing consequences and long-term decision making isn't fully formed until around the age of 25. Teenagers are wired for responsiveness to emotion, to insensitives, to the influence of adults they've been taught to trust. And when a powerful adult with resources and status grooms a young person, they're not dealing with an equal. They are exploiting a brain that is still developing its capacity to protect itself. So the curiosity that asks, why didn't they just leave? That curiosity is pointed in the wrong direction. The curiosity needs to shift, not just towards what he did, but towards who failed those children, who looked away, who stayed silent, who chose their access to power over the safety of a minor. And what those institutions, those organizations and individuals are doing right now to be accountable. Because accountability isn't just about the perpetrator, it's about everyone who was in the room and said nothing. And then there's what happened with the files themselves, which is its own harm layered on top. When the documents were released, thousands went out without proper redaction. The names of survivors appeared publicly, addresses, images, personal information that was never meant to be seen. The Department of Justice subsequently withdrew approximately 9,500 documents after survivors and their lawyers raised the alarm. Nearly 100 survivors had their information improperly exposed. And the result of that, some received harassment and some reported death threats. These were individuals, human beings who had made a careful, conscious decision about what they shared and what they kept private. But that decision was taken from them without warning, without care, without the legal protection they were entitled to. Brené Brown draws this distinction between chosen vulnerability and forced exposure. Chosen vulnerability is showing up on your own terms. It takes courage. It builds something. Forced exposure is different. It removes agency. It re-traumatizes. It says your privacy, your safety, your healing, those matter less than what the public wants to see. Those are not the same thing, and we need to stop treating them as if they are. And beyond the statistics or commentary, one of the other things I want to share is this, is what I noticed happening in my own body when the Epstein files dropped, and what that might tell us about what's happening in the bodies of the people around us right now. When the files dropped, I felt it before I made sense of it. As I said, the fuzzy head, the stomach dropping, and my body tightening, like a recognition, fear and anxiety arriving without invitation. That's re-triggering, not in a clinical, detached way, but in the most human, honest way I know how to describe it. And the research tells us that trauma isn't stored only in memory, it's stored in the body, in the nervous system, in the places that hold experience before language gets to it. In the book, the body keeps the score. It tells us that when something happens that echoes a past experience of harm, the body responds before the mind has caught up. That's not dysfunction. That's exactly how trauma works. So when I felt that tightening, I didn't judge it. I noticed it and I sat with it. And I asked myself, what does this need right now? That capacity to notice, to stay, to ask, that didn't come overnight. It took time, it took work. It took sitting with things I would rather have walked away from. And here's something else I'll share, but don't tell anybody else. I'm a grown woman. I've been on this healing journey since my mid-20s. And it's only in the last 18 months that I have been able to sleep in the dark. I didn't have the capacity to feel safe without the lights turned on. And it took a long, non-linear time for that part of my life to get to where it is now. And that's okay. I'm not sharing that for sympathy. I'm sharing it because I think it matters to name what healing actually can look like. Not the version where you do the work and then you're done. The version where a grown woman like me, who knows herself, who has done the work and continues to do the work, still needed the lights to stay on to feel safe. Because if that's true for me, and it was, then what is happening right now in the body of someone who hasn't had that 18 months yet, who doesn't have the language for what they're feeling, who is scrolling through the coverage of the Epstein files and feeling something they can't name, a familiar dread, a distance from themselves, a heaviness that seems to just have arrived from nowhere. They might think they're having a bad day or a bad week, even a bad month. They might not know that their body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. The fuzzy head, the stomach drop, the tightening. Those are not signs that something's wrong with them, that they're sick. They're signs that something was done to them, and the body remembers. And I want to say something to the person who doesn't yet have a name for what they're carrying. And when I say carrying, I mean what they're feeling. You don't need one right now. You don't need to have it figured out. This episode may land somewhere unexpected in you, and that matters. And you're allowed to sit with that without having to explain it to yourself or anyone else. One of the things I've come to, and it has become one of the most grounding truths I hold, is this. Truth is felt, not thought. You don't think your way into understanding something this deep. You feel your way through it, slowly, at your own pace, with as much gentleness as you can extend to yourself. Another is understanding that suffering often exists in time travel. When the mind gets pulled back to the past, when a headline, a name, a file drop arrives and takes you somewhere you thought you had left. The suffering isn't in the present moment itself. It's in the travelling backwards. And the gentlest thing you can do is notice that you've left the present and find your way back to the present without judgment. I say all that because it connects to something I always come back to: capacity. The capacity to sit with something is dependent on where we are. Capacity can't be forced. It has to be accepted. And that's why I won't tell you it'll be all right. Not because I don't believe it will be, but because I know that those words said at the wrong moment to someone who isn't there yet can feel like another dismissal. A rush towards a resolution that doesn't honour where you actually are right now. We each have different capacities to hold space for ourselves, and that's not weakness. That's not a measure of how much work you've done or how far along you are. Capacity is personal. It shifts, it grows. What you couldn't hold last year, you might be able to hold now. And what someone else can't hold today, they will be able to hold one day. And recovery from sexual violence is not linear. It doesn't move in stages, completed in a specific order. It moves forward and backwards through different emotions, different seasons, different capacities. And research consistently confirms this, and it matches everything I know from lived experience. So I won't rush you towards the all right, but I will say this: I know it's possible because I'm living it. I'm living in the possible. Imperfectly, but honestly, with the lights on less than they used to be. I know the world looks different depending on where you're sitting. In some countries, in some communities, the weight of the stigma around sexual violence is heavier. The systems are less accessible. The family and community responses can be more complicated. And if that's your reality, I feel that too. And this episode is still very much for you. One of the things that has genuinely helped me not just understand, but feel it, is sitting with the truth of impermanence. Impermanence. What a beautiful word. And it means the state or fact of lasting for only a limited period of time. The root of that word comes from the Latin permanere, to remain, to stay, and the I am at the front means not. So impermanence simply means that which does not stay. Nothing stays as it is. The season you're in right now will not last. That's not a promise about outcomes. It's the nature of things. And there is something steady in that when you can find your way to it. The pain doesn't stay. The weight doesn't stay. The lights on during the night doesn't stay. Not because you force them out, but because nothing does. That's not motivation. That's just what is true. Another thing I return to: you can't give what you don't have. Before I could show up fully for anyone else, I had to know what I was holding. Not aggressively, not as a measure of how broken I was, but honestly, what do I have today? What is my capacity today? And what does that mean for how I move through the day? Living starts from the inside. That's not a motivational phrase for me. It's the most practical thing I've learnt. The external world, the files, the verdicts, the commentary, the footnotes, none of that is where your life is lived. Your life is lived from inside you, from the capacity you have today, from the truth you can feel, not just think. And that capacity, however small it feels right now, is enough to start from. And one of the most powerful things that has helped me build that capacity is gratitude. Not the gratitude people flippantly post about on social media, not a long list, not a performance. It's something which is personal and something that gives me oxygen. It started with walks. I would go out walking, and for every step, I would just simply say, thank you. Thank you for the ability to take this step. Thank you for the trainers on my feet. Thank you for the pavement that I walk on. Thank you for the breath in my body. Thank you for the ability to walk. Thank you that I can breathe the air. Thank you that I can feel the wind and the rain on my face. Thank you for the ability to cry. I would say thank you for everything. Everything, small, large, anything I could find, I would just say thank you. Thank you for allowing me to go to the coffee shop and buy a coffee. Thank you for the coffee. Thank you for the person who made the coffee for me and gave it to me with a smile. Thank you. And slowly, something in me began to settle. And it's so interesting because I was doing some research and found that the science actually supports what happens with gratitude. Research shows that gratitude practice reduces cortisol, the stress hormone, and builds resilience. Gratitude activates the part of the brain responsible for emotional regulation. And studies specifically on trauma survivors show that gratitude plays a decisive role in helping people feel more satisfied with their lives, not because it erases what happened, but because it shifts where attention was anchored. And there is also research linking gratitude practice directly to better sleep. The mind filled with thanks rather than anxiety is a mind that can begin to rest. For me, giving thanks for the small things to God has been part of this. Anchoring my thoughts there, in gratitude, in truth, has calmed the chaos inside me that nothing else could reach. That's my experience. I'm not prescribing it, but I'm not going to leave it out either because it's true. I also started using the 5-minute journal created by UJ Ramdas and Alex Icon. A great addition to my morning routine. I used to do it every morning when I arrived at the office before I started working. It helped me focus. It helped me to begin the day from a place of intention rather than reaction. Something that simple, 5 minutes before the work world came in, made a huge difference. And there's something else which I think I want to bring up today. And it's a phrase that well-meaning people say, and I've heard it many times: life happens for you, not to you. That phrase, I don't know, but it rubs me the wrong way. And I'll explain why. Because having experienced sexual harm multiple times from a young girl, that was absolutely done to me. That is a fact. It was not something that happened for me. It was not a lesson I needed. It was not part of a plan that I had for myself. It was harm done by another person to me. So should I be grateful for that? Absolutely not. I can't be grateful for that experience, and I don't think anyone should be asked to be. But here's what I can be grateful for. The desire within me to push through, the part of me that kept going through the hurt, through the memories, through the triggers, through the disappointments, that part, that's the part that I can be grateful for. Because every time I feel pain, every time something resurfaces, every time I'm triggered, it reminds me that I'm alive and I'm still here, and that I have the opportunity to live on past these experiences. That's what I'm grateful for. Not the harm, not the survival of it, but the desire that I refuse to stop moving forward. And there's a difference between gratitude for suffering and gratitude in spite of it. One asks too much, the other is an act of profound defiance. Psychologists call this post-traumatic growth, not gratitude for what happened, but gratitude for what emerged from surviving it. The resilience, the clarity, the capacity to feel deeply, the refusal to be defined by what was done. That distinction matters. And if you're not there yet, if the idea of gratitude feels like a stone around your neck right now, that's okay. It's not a destination you need to reach today. But if there's one small thing, one breath, one step, one moment of noticing you're still here, that's a place to start with thank you. All of that, the capacity, the gratitude, the desire, that refuse to stop, that's the inside work. But there are outside realities too, and justice and accountability are two of them. Survivors who came forward were led to believe something, that the powerful people would be held accountable, that crimes would be fully investigated, that Epstein's network, not just Epstein, would be exposed. Instead, Epstein died in custody before trial, and most people connected to him, except for Ghislaine Maxwell, never charged. Key documents remained sealed. Investigations seemed to narrow and not widen, and it seemed as if justice has stalled. Truth became conditional, and dignity, the promise that survivors would be believed, respected, no longer dismissed, was replaced with media scrutiny, public reliving of abuse, and a label: Epstein victims, not whole human beings. That's not dignity. That's harm repackaged. They teach everyone else what not to expect. When survivors watch delays, protected perpetrators, collapsed investigations, they learn that silence is safer than speaking. Silence isn't chosen in a vacuum, it's learned. And when trust in justice collapses, abuse thrives in the dark. This failure isn't history, it's a warning, and survivors everywhere are watching. The volume of the coverage has its own effects too. As I've said, Naomi Klein wrote about in the book, The Shock Doctrine, how overload produces passivity, not action. People disconnect, disengage, and that disconnection protects no one except the people who cause the harm. So here's what I've come to understand. Justice and accountability are not always the same river. Justice is what the system is supposed to deliver. Accountability is what we choose to hold ourselves to when it doesn't. For organizations, institutions, and individuals who had contact with Epstein or those associated with him, this is the moment. Not for air-filled statements, for real, transparent, responsible action. For the sake of the survivors first, always. Because the news cycle will move on, it always does, and the survivors will still be here. Shame thrives in silence, and then there is the silence of those who were simply present. Not perpetrators, not institutions, just people who saw something, felt something was off, and said nothing. Survivors often know exactly who those people are, and that knowledge of being seen and not helped is its own kind of wound. And while we wait for institutions, organisations, and individuals to find their courage, there is something each of us can do right now. So, if you're still tracking with me, here's what I'm asking. Think about the people in your life, the ones you know or suspect have lived experience of sexual violence, childhood sexual abuse, or grooming. They're there. Statistically, they're there. And right now, with this coverage flooding every feed and every newsroom, some of them are struggling silently. Doesn't make them weak. They're struggling because their body is doing what bodies do, because the headlines are personal in a way that other people's headlines aren't, because someone just dropped a file with a name in it and the world moved on in 5 seconds and they're still sitting with what that has stirred. So check in. No need for a hashtag, a message, a call, a knock on a door. You don't need an hour. You don't need the perfect words. You don't even need to know what to say after. You just need 5 minutes. 5 minutes to ask, are you all right? And then listen. Just ask, are you all right? And this is the part that matters most. Listen, don't try to fix it. Don't reassure them it'll be fine when you don't know that it will be. Don't change the subject because it gets uncomfortable. Don't say, I don't know how you've coped, because that makes it about you. Don't say, at least something is being done, when for many survivors, nothing adequate has been done. Don't say, you seem fine, because fine is often the most practiced performance some of us have. Just ask, and then stay. And if you're sitting with uncertainty, if you suspect someone in your life has lived experience but it's never been spoken, and you don't want to overstep or assume, that instinct to reach out is worth following. You don't have to name what you think happened. You don't have to get it perfect. Just ask how they are and mean it. Empathy, real empathy, the kind Brené Brown describes, doesn't try to make things better. It tries to make the person feel less alone. That's it. That's the whole ask. And for anyone receiving the check-in, if someone reaches out and asks how you really are, you're allowed to say not great. You're allowed to say, I don't know. You're allowed to receive care that you're not used to receiving. You don't have to be fine for someone else's comfort. You just have to be honest about where you are. That permission to be all right when someone finally asks, that matters. One of the many things I've come to believe through everything is that there's only one type of growth that has no downside. Not financial growth, not influence, not power. Those forms of elevation always cost someone something. The only growth that costs no one is elevating yourself as a human being with a heart. That kind of growth creates compassion, and compassion doesn't require someone else to suffer for you to have it. That's what I'm asking of the world right now. Not outrage, not performance, not carefully worded statements. Just a little more heart, a little more willingness to stay in the discomfort, a little more empathy for the people who are carrying something most of us will never fully understand. And there are children right now, today, who are in situations they cannot name and cannot escape. Children who need the adults around them to be paying attention. This conversation matters, not just for survivors looking back. It matters for children who need someone to be curious enough, brave enough to ask the right questions right now. And for anyone listening who has lived experience of sexual violence, whether it happened in childhood or later, whether you've named it or not, whether you are early in your journey or further along of healing, I want to say this directly to you. I wish I could reach through this microphone and hug every single one of you and remind you, this is your life. What was done to you was ugly. What you've carried has been heavy. The system may have failed you. The people around you may not have shown up in the way they should have. And still, this is your life. You get to choose how you live it from here, not from the verdict or lack of verdict, not from a headline, not from a whisper, and not from whether the world finally decides to give you more than 5 seconds, but from inside you. From whatever capacity you have today, even if that capacity is small, even if it's just getting through today, that's enough. You're enough. I won't tell you it will be all right because I don't know what season you're in. What I know is that it's possible, where the body finds its way back to something that feels like safety, where living from the inside becomes less of an idea and more of a feeling you actually recognize. I know that because I'm living it. And somewhere in that living, I found gratitude, not for what happened, never for that, but for the breath still in my body, for the step I could take, for the rain I could feel, for the fact that I'm still here and still choosing life. And even now, when I have a flashback dream and wake up in a cold sweat, I say thank you because I know I'm absolutely fine. I couldn't do that before. Those 2 words have the capacity to bring peace to chaos. If you're not there yet, that's okay. Start with 1 breath and 1 step, 1 moment of noticing you're still here. That's enough. And I genuinely believe that you can too. Find your person, check in, ask a question, then listen. Because they matter more than the headlines. Thank you for listening to this episode of Like Me Podcast. If anything I've shared has made you stop, think, or see yourself just a little bit clearer, fantastic. I love this for you. I love this for me. And honestly, I love this for us. And if this episode shifted something in you, give yourself a moment to sit with it. And if anything felt a little bit too heavy, speak to someone you trust. What I've learnt is that we don't heal in isolation, and you don't have to carry any of this alone. This space isn't about staying in survival mode. It's about lifting ourselves out of the dimension that has tried to keep us trapped and choosing a version of ourselves that's still becoming. If this resonates with you, share with someone who might need a reminder or a friend. And make sure you're following the podcast so you don't miss the next episode. I'm JK. Stay open, stay self-curious, and remember, it's our time to thrive.